Greetings and welcome to the slideshow build of Eduard's F6F3 Hellcat in 48th scale. For this project, I had a couple of goals that I wanted to accomplish. Goal number one was to be able to enter this in a model competition at my local hobby shop, and goal number two was to learn some new techniques that I had never used before. With that in mind, I wanted to challenge myself with a kit that I had no knowledge of, and decided on Eduard's F6F Hellcat. I had never built an Eduard kit before this one, and I had never even really paid much attention to the Hellcat. Naval aviation was during World War II is definitely not one of my strong areas. So it was going to be a challenge all around. One of the other things I wanted to be able to do, because it was going to be a competition model kit, was I wanted to be able to detail as much of the visible parts as I could. So the two areas I really wanted to focus on were the engine and the cockpit. Between the two, I figured that the engine would be more difficult, and so I decided to work on that one first. Get the hard stuff out of the way, and then the rest of the kit would be smooth sailing. So I started. Basically, the first thing I did was check my references. I looked at many pictures of the R2800 engine online, trying to determine, how much detail I wanted to add, and how far I wanted to take it. The etched brass set that comes with the kit has some detail for the engine, but I didn't really like the flat nature of the photo etch and decided not to use it and just build my own details. So with that, I started with the cylinders. I drilled out holes for the spark plugs, as well as holes for additional plumbing that would go around the cylinders. Next, I decided to add the large connection ring between the crankcase and the gear reduction housing. And this I did with plastic, with evergreen plastic. I used a sheet for the ring and then evergreen rod for the bolts, cutting each one out individually. So you can see here how the gear reduction housing sits on top of that, and then it gets sandwiched in between the gear reduction housing and the cylinders. You can also see here that I added detail to the distributor caps and the magneto. In this next picture, you can see that I have constructed the ignition harness out of solder. The solder is really nice for this because it bends really easy to that circular shape. Here, all the parts are together. You can see the major components. I began adding additional plumbing to the cylinders using brass wire and fluoro wire. Here you can see the cables going from the magneto to the distributor caps, again, using fluoro wire there. Fluoro wire comes in multiple different diameters, and I find it's very nice for doing detail work on models. Here are all the major components put together. Basically, the only thing that's left is the ignition wires. And here you can see I started constructing them. Each cylinder gets two wires. They have a spark plug on the front of the cylinder and a spark plug on the back of the cylinder. So I made a set of wires for each one, a short one for the front, long one for the back, and then each of the 18 cylinders gets basically one of these pairs of wires. So here it is all wired up and ready for paint. I decided to base coat the engine components in black. I find black is a good base for doing this type of painting. So here you can see the gear reduction housing painted black, and then the main engine painted black. For the main color, I used Vallejo's Metallizer aluminum to paint the cylinders, and then I used a kind of a bluish gray to paint the gear reduction housing. Here you can see the engine painted up and added with all the detail painted up and some weathering with oils. I basically added a black oil wash to the cylinder heads, gave the whole thing kind of a grimy look, and then came back in with some dark browns and blacks to kind of give some smudges and grease stains and just general soot and dirt. There are a few photo etch placards that go on the engine as well to really kind of help liven it up. Now that I was happy with the engine, I decided to work on the engine cowling. This is an area where Eduard has zero detail. There are just blank spaces in there. So I set about adding some detail to the interior of the engine cowlings. This included the side cowlings and the nose cowling. I also decided to kind of blank off the rather large air scoops underneath the engine opening, as you'd be able to see light coming through there, and it just didn't look very realistic. So here you can see how that blanking piece fits underneath the engine. Now, normally it would fit much tighter and actually move back to the firewall to allow air into the engine and the oil cooler. But for this purposes, I just needed to keep it blanked off so that just no light would shine through. But here you can see there's actually a decent amount of structure that you can see through the side of the engine there, which is why I added the detail. These pieces got a good coat of interior green, and then I started weathering it with oils. I may have gone a little overboard on the piece at the bottom there, but really, in reality, it's something you'll never see once the kit is put together. I also did cut the cowl flaps and pose those a little bit open, as I was trying to model an airplane that maybe had just landed, so those cowl flaps would have still been open. And here you can see how it fits with the paint job. Pretty happy with it. But again, I mean, you won't see a lot, but you see enough. So next, I decided to tackle the cockpit. Now, I hadn't really looked at the cockpit before starting this kit, but I was really disappointed when I got to the cockpit. I know Eduard is usually known for good, accurate, detailed kits, and overall this kit is a very accurate and detailed kit. I feel, though, that the cockpit is rather lacking. So I decided to scratch build most of the cockpit, and that started with the seat. The seat is really overly thick, and so I wanted to rebuild it out of aluminum. And in this case, I'm actually using an aluminum soda can. So I drew out my template and cut it out. However, because that aluminum is really thin, the whole thing just kind of fell apart when I started bending it. So I decided to scrap the idea with aluminum and move over to plastic. The plastic was a little bit more forgiving, and I was able to actually glue it and shape it how I wanted to. So here you can see the major parts cut out, and then I get it assembled. I also decided to rebuild the cockpit floor and rear bulkhead. So here you can see I actually used the kit-provided parts as templates and cut out new ones out of evergreen styrene. Here you can see the actual seat assembled, and then it has a small piece of photo etch that goes in there to finish off the seat. And it's actually a little bit smaller than the kit-provided piece, but it's also much thinner, so I think it looks a lot more realistic. Here I've begun detailing the floor of the cockpit. The Hellcat floor was actually rather unique, and it had these two channels where the rudder pedals were, and then a lot of this structural detail underneath where the pilot seat would go. So that's what I started building there. One of the things that I have learned, and that I'm learning about scratch building, is constant dry fitting is a must. Pretty much after any change I would make to these parts, I would dry fit it. So here's just a quick shot of the major components, the floor and the rear bulkhead, dry fitted to the fuselage, and I was feeling pretty happy with the fit. I've now added a little bit more detail. There's a large lever on the floor of the Hellcat that I replicated with brass. And then you see I have got the rudder pedals, the control column, the instrument panel, and one of the side panels. I chose to use the kit-provided instrument panel because the Eduard pre-painted photo etch looks fantastic, and there was no reason to discard that. I added the support structure to the seat here, again just using strips of styrene. And built that up. Here I've begun detailing the sidewall. I used a combination of Eduard kit-provided parts, plastic, and floral wire. And again, constant test fitting is required to make sure that everything fits in there together. That little handle you see there, that was actually what the pilot used to crank open the canopy. Again, here's more additional sidewall detail, adding all the electrical boxes and that subsequent wiring. And then this is the opposite side. Same thing, this is where the throttle quadrant was, so I had to rebuild the throttle quadrant. And you can also see a little bit of detailing behind the pilot seat, or on the back of the fuselage there, that would be visible through the side windows. Here's additional detailing on the cockpit floor and rear bulkhead. There was a lot of cabling and wiring that went behind the pilot seat, so I added that. I also used the kit supplied headrest, just attached that to the styrene bulkhead that I created. And here's all the major components ready for paint. So everything got base coated in black, and then a coat of interior green applied. Here is the pre-painted photo etch instrument panel, It's really interesting. And again, I'd never done an Eduard kit. I've never even really used their Eduard photo etch before this, so this was quite an eye opener, and I really enjoyed it. The instrument panel is actually multiple layers, kind of sandwiched together, plus little switches and knobs, and I just think it turned out really great. Here we have the painted cockpit. You can see I have attached the lower lap belts, but I haven't attached the straps, the shoulder straps. This is because I will add them at a later time once the build is complete, because I want to have them draped out over the side of the cockpit. So at this point, I had finished painting all the detail stuff on the cockpit and decided to get the fuselage buttoned up. So here you can see a couple of shots of the cockpit installed in the fuselage. Like I said, it's still a rather roomy cockpit, and so a lot can be seen when the kit is together. Here I've got tape and clamps holding the fuselage halves together. Overall, they went together really well. They just needed some strong reinforcement to keep them together while the glue set. You can see as well that I've got the wings and horizontal tails assembled and glued. Next, I decided to turn my attention to the landing gear. The Eduard Profi Pack comes with a very nice set of resin wheels. The detail on these were exquisite, just simply amazing. Once assembled, they absolutely looked the part, and they just blew my mind. As for the landing gear struts, I decided to add the brake cables that would be found on the landing gear. The F6F has rather robust landing gear, but for the most part, they're actually pretty simple. So the brake line cable comes down the landing gear, and then it eventually attaches to the wheel. Here's a completed wheel assembly. Like I said, the resin wheels were just amazingly detailed. One of the areas that was another bit of a disappointment for this kit was the propeller. The bluish gray propeller on the left is the Eduard kit. The lighter gray one with the black center, that is actually a propeller off of an old Academy F4 Corsair. I found the Corsair propeller much more accurate in shape and also much more detailed than the Eduard offering, so I decided to use the Academy propeller. On the instrument cowl, there's a little lip that the kit doesn't have, so I added this using just some strips of styrene. That's what you can see there in the white. At this time, I also decided to mask up the canopies using the provided die-cut masks. These fit perfectly, and I had no issues with them. The Eduard kit actually comes with two sets of fuselage, one for the F6F3 and one for the F6F5. Since I was doing the 3 model, I decided to use the 5 model fuselage halves to test out how I was going to do the chipping. Now, the chipping that I was going to use for this is something that I had not done very often, basically the hairspray technique. So I decided to spray down the initial primer color, the zinc chromate color, give it a gloss coat, and then spray down the hairspray, and then lay on some intermediate blue and the dark blue. I then came back over with, once it was dry, with a dampened paintbrush, and wet down the whole thing, and then with a toothpick started picking at the panel lines and revealing the primer underneath. Overall, I was pretty happy with the effect. So I decided to move forward by painting the remaining, the actual kit parts. So here you can see the wings and parts of the fuselage under that zinc chromate primer. Again, here's the fuselage. The nose cowling is actually not permanently attached. I have it kind of tacked on there, but I decided to paint the fuselage without the engine attached. I was going to do the same hairspray technique with the propeller as well, so I undercoated it in the Vallejo aluminum, and then I will do the hairspray over that and paint the black and the yellow. So I unfortunately didn't take many pictures of the actual painting process, so here you can see the wings after they've had all the painting layers applied and then the chipping applied. Really tried to keep the chipping heavy most towards the panels where the guns were, and some of the smaller access panels on the inboard wing there. Here you can see the fuselage as well. Again, trying to keep the chipping closer to where crewmen would have actually been working on the airplane. Here is the propeller. It has been chipped, decaled, and gloss coated. And now I have applied decals to the fuselage and gloss coated that as well in preparation for a wash. Here you can see the landing gear, painted, washed, and decaled. Here are the wheels. And now we have the fuselage decaled and gloss coated up. I picked this option because I really liked the red around the stars and bars. I just thought it was a really great contrast to all the blue of the plane. It just really stood out to me. I ended up replacing the kit exhaust with brass tubing. I just thought it had a better look. So that you can see that I've installed the brass tubing underneath the cowling there. And here is, for the most part, the completed fuselage after wash has been applied. A couple of different angles here. At this point, I attached the tail planes, but I haven't removed the masking yet until it gets a final dull coat. Here you can really see the panel lining underneath the airplane. I thought it turned out pretty good. Here are the wings, top and bottom. Again, I just love the red around the stars and bars. It's just such a striking difference between the blue paint. I decided to try something new here using the salt technique. So I wet the whole model with a little bit with water and a little bit of dish detergent, and sprinkled coarse salt all over it, let it dry, and then I sprayed an extremely thin layer of white over the kit to kind of help give it a little bit of a faded look. In the end, you really can't tell, but still, I think I'm okay with the results. I think if I were to do it again next time, I would, instead of using white, I would go with a slightly lighter shade of the base color and try that. So now the wings have been attached, all the masking has been removed, the matte coat has been applied, and so at this point it's just a matter of adding all the details and doing the final weather paths. On the bottom you can see I've added exhaust stains and the gun stains. These were all done with airbrush. The exhaust was mixtures of black and brown, and then the gun stains were just black. At this point, I decided to paint up the pilot. This is a fantastic resin piece from Aero Bonus, painted up in standard navy khakis. The figure has a lot of detail to it and a great natural pose, and pretty happy with how this turned out. So here's the final kit. Overall, I was pretty pleased with how this turned out. I set out to do a lot of scratch building, which I'd never done before, and I was quite happy with the results. I also set out to use a new chipping method using the hairsprayed method, and I was rather happy with how that turned out as well. And so overall, I consider this a success. The base is just a piece of wood, the wood base that I got from a local craft store, and then on top of it I laid hand cut strips of balsa wood and some etched brass for the tie down strips, and then painted it in various shades of blue and gray, and took some sandpaper to wear it down to kind of give that worn look, also adding a couple of oil stains and general scuff marks to it, just to give the impression of a U.S. carrier deck during World War II. You can see also the overall weathering effect from the engines. The Hellcat engines showed a lot of wear if you look at sources, and so it was fun replicating the grays and the browns and the blacks of the engine exhaust on the side of the airplane there. So pretty happy. I think overall this was a great kit. Like I said, there's a few little disappointments, mainly in the cockpit area and the lack of detail on the inside of the engine cowl, but nothing that couldn't easily be remedied. I did mention that this was going to be a competition piece, so I just wanted to provide a quick update here. I did take this to the competition at my local hobby shop. Here you can see it all packed safely and ready for transport. There were about 25 entries that day, and I managed to take a second place, so I was actually rather proud of that. And quick shout out to two of my kids. They both had models in this competition as well in the kids category, and they both took home ribbons as well. So a very proud dad moment there. But anyways, if you've stuck around this long, I appreciate it. Thanks for taking a look, and I hope you will consider liking and subscribing to my channel if you like what you see, and be sure to hit the bell notifications so that you can be alerted of new updates. I try to post weekly, and yeah, please leave me a comment down below. I will try to get to it and read it as fast as possible and respond. I'm really looking for feedback on what I can do to improve and what kind of content you would like to see. So thank you for looking, and I'll see you next time.